session is called Your Guide to Better Communication in Teams. And today it'll be presented to you by Andy Honeycutt. And we'll begin in just a few minutes. We're going to give it just a couple minutes for some more attendees to log on. Okay, Andy, whenever you're ready.
All right. Hopefully we're coming through loud and clear. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this session. This is your guide to better communication in Teams. As we get started, I just want to say thank you to Commsverse for the opportunity to present to everyone here today. And also want to thank all of our volunteers, the other speakers, everyone who makes this happen, including our sponsors. The sponsors are really what make the show happen. They will make this go. So we want to give a big shout out to all of these sponsors for coming together and putting on such a great event. Be sure to check out some of the breakout rooms where the sponsors are. You can get some one-on-one time with them. It's really, really cool. So with that, hi, I'm Andy, and I'm going to be your presenter here today as we talk about a guide to better communication in Teams. I'm based out of Charlotte, North Carolina, so I'm in the US. I run a company called Upskill Tech, where we do consulting, training, and coaching. My primary role is president, and I'm also an enterprise collaboration specialist. I've also worked with a company called C Prime ASPE since 2011. I'm a senior trainer and courseware instructor over there. I specialize in all things SharePoint, Office 365, and Microsoft Teams. In fact, I'm a Microsoft MVP. So I get to go behind the curtain in Redmond every now and then and interact with the product team and the engineers there. You can find me on Twitter at Andy Honeycutt. I'm one of the weird Honeycutts. My last name is spelled H-U-N-E-Y-C-U-T-T. So I'm pretty easy to find on Twitter, Andy Honeycutt. And I'm also on LinkedIn, but I'm William there. That's my legal first name, so that's what I go by there. But William is Andy, Andy is William. So with that, let's talk about our session here today. What we want to cover in this session. So Teams is built around communication. It's a chat-based tool. That's the core of Microsoft Teams. So what we want to talk about are ways to effectively communicate, some best practices, some etiquette, some do's and don'ts. And we want to get beyond just the how to, but we want to talk a little bit about the why and the when. So we're going to guide you through the different ways that we can communicate in Teams, whether it's one-on-one or one-on-many in a small group or private conversation, but also if it's one-to-many or many-to-many in an open post or an open conversation inside of a channel. We're also going to tie this back into meetings and how meeting chat works, not only for people that are members of the organization, but also for external entities and guests that might be dialing in to the meeting. So we're going to talk about how to keep that organized. We're going to talk about how to go back and search through your conversations just a little bit, and we're going to try to give you some best practices as we're moving through this. So just a brief comparison as we get started. There's two different ways to essentially communicate inside of Microsoft Teams. You can have that private one-on-one conversation or that private group conversation. That's chat. You'll find that in the left-hand navigation on the Teams application. But we also have posts and conversations that happen inside of channels. So if you're on the left-hand navigation, you're going to look for the Teams icon. You'll click on Teams and that'll take you into your Teams. And from there, you'll be able to see the channels that you have access to and you can communicate. Those are more open and public conversations inside of Microsoft Teams. Now, they both allow us to communicate, but there's a why and a when that we use a chat versus while working inside of a post. That's what we're going to demystify a little bit here today. Both of these are going to support notifications, so there are ways that you can be informed and keep track of those incoming communications. But the audience and the size of these conversations is going to vary significantly. They both support app mentions as well, and we'll talk about when it's appropriate to use an app mention and how that can definitely impact your message. Now, as far as the audience size is concerned, if you're in a private chat, we're talking about smaller groups. You can have up to 250 people in there, but when you get above 20, you're going to lose some functionality. Versus when you're in posts and you're inside of Teams and channels, you can have up to 10,000 people potentially consuming and interacting with that message. Both of these are going to have a history. Depending on the settings of your organization, the chat and the conversations that you have can be persistent and searchable. However, you can put some rules in place where maybe private chat disappears after n number of days. Both of these are going to support calls. So directly from chat and communication, you're going to be able to do some calling, audio, video, and screen sharing. But if you're in chat, it's going to be limited to smaller conversations, up to 20 people. When you get above 20 people in a private chat, then you have to schedule a meeting and go from there. Versus if it were fewer than 20, you could just ad hoc and start a call right from there. And you can have in a private chat up to 300 people inside of a meeting. And the meeting will be tied to chat. In fact, guests can actually dial into that. They can call in and they can participate with that. With channels, it's a little bit more difficult. So we'll talk about some of the nuances there. But that's just kind of a brief overview of the two. So with that in mind, whenever it comes time to start introducing new organizations to Microsoft Teams, I typically start out with two things. I start out with meeting and I start out with chat. And part of that is it's really building a foundation of the familiar. When you introduce Teams, you want to start with things that users are comfortable with. You want to start things with a known entity. So meetings and chat are really the way to do that. Meetings tie chat right into it, and chat is something that we use every single day, whether we're on our phones and we're texting with friends and family or even coworkers and colleagues. But it's also very familiar because of things like instant messaging. And even more recently, like Skype, using Skype to chat with one another, this is the natural evolution of that. So it's something that's familiar to a lot of our users. In fact, between 70 and 95% of all messaging done in Teams is actually done through chat. Now, whether that's the best place to communicate that message is something we're going to talk about here today. But the high percentage of the users using chat is because of familiarity based off of other tools that they've worked with previously. So you're going to get a lot more chat activity than you probably are going to have Teams messaging and Teams channel and post related activity. But start with what your users know. They know how to join a meeting. They know how to participate in a meeting. They know how to chat. So we start with that and then we build off of it. So chat. This is the chat user interface. So you're going down that left-hand navigation. You got your chat icon. From there, you can view your chats in the left-hand rail there. It's kind of the white space that says chat, and you see recent contacts. And then you have in the main interface in the center, you actually have your conversation that's happening. Your messaging will actually be in purple, and any messaging from the other participants is actually going to be in the white text blocks along the way. Most recent messages will be down at the bottom, and then you can search back up through the chat history selectively or by scrolling. You'll also be able to access chat from the mobile device. Now, when it comes time to work with this, starting a chat's pretty straightforward. You got your little formatter up at the top, or pad and pen. Click on that icon and you can start a brand new chat. But what you'll find inside of here are multiple levels of chat. You'll have one-on-one, you'll have small group chats, but also your meeting chats are going to be stored from here, or are going to be accessible from here. You can actually go in here, right click on any chat, and you can pin it to the top so you can get back to those important chats in the user interface. And then you're going to be able to create a message right in the center using the composure, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Now, as far as the sorting is concerned, again, you can pin those important chats to the top. So there's your first best practice. If it's an important communication, go ahead and pin it to the top so you don't have to scroll through this in order to find it. Below that, you'll see more recent chat messages are going to be at the top. Anything you haven't read will be highlighted in bold, and anything that is a little bit older will be toward the bottom of this menu. That being said, you're going to want to try to delete some of these messages. You can't do it. You cannot delete an entire chat thread. However, you can delete some individual messages if you need to. Now, when we talk about chat, we're talking about one-on-one or one-to-many, but this is private. You have to be a member of the conversation, or you have to be invited into the conversation in order to participate in that conversation. So this is why so many users are comfortable with this, because it's private, it's invite only. They have some control over who can see that that message, and they don't have to worry about having to speak in front of the entire organization. But it's also that natural familiarity of something that they already use, whether it's texting or instant messaging. So starting a chat's pretty straightforward, but when you start creating a chat, you have the option to turn it into a group chat very, very quickly. So you click on the pad and pen, and then you're going to be able to enter in a name or names. These are people that are internal to the organization, people that are part of your tenant, and that are going to be able to communicate with you. As you start adding in multiple people into a private chat, there's a little drop-down menu on the far right-hand side. You can select that, and then you'll be able to tie in additional people. That's a group chat. You can add in other people later on as needed. So using that group chat option, I'm going to be able to rename it at any time, and basically anybody who's a part of that conversation can rename it. So that's your next best practice. Make sure you're naming these small group chats so that at a glance, you know what that conversation is about, so that you can very quickly identify it in the navigation, and it allows you to differentiate from one conversation to another. So take advantage of the naming capability. Also know in the top right-hand corner, directly above my head, you're going to be able to select the people icon, and you're going to be able to tag additional people into the conversation. You can add people from this menu. You would also be able to see who's a part of the conversation, and you can remove people from the conversation as well. You even have the option to leave the conversation yourself. And if you're in smaller chats, fewer than 20, right above me, you see there's options there for audio, video, and screen sharing. So you can do small calls right away, and everybody who's a part of the conversation will automatically be connected, or have the option to connect whenever you call them. Now, if you need to tag somebody else into a pre-existing group chat, we have the ability to do some branching if we need to. And what we mean by that is I can go and add a person to this chat. And by adding you to it, I have the option to allow you to see everything that we've communicated about previously, but I can also prevent you from seeing that. I can allow you to see the history for the whole conversation, the history for n number of days, or I can limit that to no chat history at all, and we're creating a branch and a new conversation while keeping our original conversation intact. So we have control over how others are going to be able to tag in to a pre-existing conversation. We can keep that history private if we want, or we can include them in everything that we've talked about up to this point. Now, once we start using chat, take advantage of the composer. You have the ability just to start typing a new message immediately, and that's great. In fact, it supports copy, cut, and paste. So you can add text and formatting and even images right in line in your communication. It's really, really cool. But if you choose the little A icon with the paintbrush, you can open up the composer, and then you have significantly more options to be able to craft your message, to compose that message. You can do formatting, and it does, again, support copy and paste formatting. You can do indents and outdents and bulleted lists and numbered lists. You would also be able to do quote blocks. You can do links and hyperlinks, And you can even add in code and text snippets, which is really, really cool. So whenever you're using this, just a couple of things. Try to keep it simple, highlight what you need to, use some of the formatting options, and if you need to provide a URL, use the hyperlink option and give it a nice clean display name and mask or hide the URL so you don't have a really long, ugly URL eating up or taking up a lot of space inside of the message. That makes for cleaner copy. Also take advantage of the ability to express yourself. So whenever you're communicating here in that composer box along the bottom, you can add in emojis, you can add in animated GIFs, and you can do memes or stickers inside of here. This just gives you additional options to add to your message. A picture says 1,000 words, so I guess a GIF ought to exponentially expands on top of that. That being said, the admins for our teams can make sure that these are safe for work, and they can put moderation on this. They can even turn off some of these features. I find in real world application that things like GIFs and stickers are actually more applied in informal conversations, more of those fun conversations, occasionally in the more business oriented conversations that we're having. But a lot of times you're going to find this is more of an informal conversation between colleagues versus something that's strictly business related. Another thing that really need to encourage your users to do is reactions. Reactions act as an acknowledgement, a receipt that I've seen this communication, and it gives users a way to pass that along without having to type out a reply. Acknowledgement happens in the top right-hand corner of the message. You can just hover your mouse cursor over there. You'll see a thumbs up. You'll see a heart for liking it and loving it. You've also got the ability to laugh, to wow, to frown, or to be angry. And there's a drop-down menu which allows you to do things like save the message or mark the message as unread. Depending on if you're the content editor, you can edit and delete. But acknowledging is very simple. It's a simple thumbs up that I like it. It's a simple laugh, or I got it. Or maybe it's a sad face or an angry face that I'm not really thrilled with the result of this. That's a very quick way to acknowledge that you've actually received something, received and seen something. That being said, in private chat, I do have an icon that tells me when my message has been seen by my colleagues. It'll give a little check mark and just indicate that it's been seen. But this acknowledges that you have actively paid attention to this, and it just gives a quick reaction. You don't have to reply to acknowledge. So that's another best practice. React versus reply to acknowledge whenever something has been viewed and that you've actually seen it. Also, save messages if they're important to you. When you save a message, you can click on your profile in the top right-hand corner, and there's a section that says saved messages. And you can see any message that you've saved, whether it's in private chat or it's in a team out there. That's really helpful for getting back to those communications that are important, and you can unsave a message later if it's no longer important. So you can kind of clean that up. But it gives you a way to kind of bookmark messages so that you can always get back to that communication without a whole lot of effort. Now, I've already mentioned this, and this applies to the smaller groups. If I have a small group, fewer than 20 people, I have the ability to go ahead and call or do an audio or video call with them right from the chat. That's really helpful because I don't have to enter in everybody's name. It does it for me. It allows me to just go ahead and communicate right from there. This is also referred to as an ad hoc meeting. It is pretty easy. It's pretty straightforward to work with. We have the ability to do larger calls. In fact, calls now you can support up to 300 people in a call. That just went into effect here in the last month or so. So you have the ability to do to schedule a meeting. It's going to show up inside a chat, and you can have up to 300 people in there. But there are going to be limits to like the bandwidth, especially when it comes to the number of people with video inside of that. There's also limits to people dialing in via phone and connecting with the computer. So some best practices there we'll circle back to in a bit. So a couple things you need to know about chat that are really important. I've already mentioned this. Make sure you name those group chats. That's just going to help you to keep track of them. If it's a meeting related group chat, the meeting name is going to be the name of the chat. Pin those most frequently used chats to the top. And in the pin section, you can drag and drop to reorder. So you can pin them in any order that you like, but pin those important chats to the top so you can very quickly get back to them, especially if you have a lot of active chats or a lot of active meetings. I know working remote in the current environment, I have so many meetings that I'm attending in Teams, really kind of gets hard for me to keep track of it sometimes. And finding those important conversations in between all those meetings, just pin them. It's a lot simpler. I have a whole blog post over on jumpto365.com about sharing files and working with messaging. Check that out. But one of the things that I talk about there is what happens when you share files inside of chat versus when you share files inside of a conversation. This allows us to extend that conversation by bringing content into the conversation. When you're in chat and you share a file, that's tied to your OneDrive for Business account. It's going to be in a folder called Microsoft Teams chat files, and you can share that file with within a conversation. But all conversations store their files in that same folder. So that means you're going to have like maybe conflicts if you upload the same file into multiple conversations, same file name. It's going to ask if you want to override or keep both. Then it'll auto increment the names. So having an understanding of all of those files that you share as part of chat-based conversations being stored in OneDrive and being in that one central folder can go a long way and save you a lot of frustration. Now, this is about effectively communicating, not sharing content. So I do encourage you to check out that blog post at jumpto365.com. And then just know when you tag somebody else into a conversation, how much of that conversation that you want them to be privy to. It's either all or in number of days, and then you've got your ability to eliminate and kind of create a branch and a new fork. All right, so a couple of things. Can you delete an entire private chat thread? No, I've already mentioned that. I just want to make sure that we are aware of that. You can delete individual messages, but you cannot delete an individual or an entire conversation, rather. Now, this is something people have been asking Microsoft about for quite a while. Microsoft said back in January at User Voice that this is something that they are looking into. However, there's, as of like last week, there was no update on that that I was able to find. That being said, one thing I do want to mention, if you go into private chat and you delete a message that has a file associated with it, it only deletes it from the chat history. It doesn't delete it from OneDrive and from the shared folder. So the user to that file, even if you delete the message inside of the private chat. And another thing that I want to mention, since we're talking about deleting a chat, is retention policies here. A retention policy can clean up old messages. And I actually use some retention policies in some of the organizations that I work with. We have a 30-day retention period on individual messages, but it doesn't delete the entire chat history or the entire chat thread. It just deletes the individual messages that are older than N number of days. And in our case, that's 30 days. All right, so let's keep moving forward. Another feature, really cool, just got this not too long ago, the ability to pop out individual messages so that you can continue working in one area of Teams and then be able to see the other message in kind of a new window. So it got an animated GIF here, kind of showing that off. It's a really cool feature. So you basically just go in, click on the ellipsis next to the name of the chat, pop it out in a new window, and you can have that message open while you go and do other things inside of Teams. Super easy to work with, but that's a relatively new feature last month and a half. All right, switching gears a little bit. Now we're going to move into posts and open conversation. So posts are a little bit different. They used to be called conversations. In fact, when you go into your Teams navigation and you select a channel, it used to be called conversations. It got renamed post a while back. But posts are conversations. These are open to people that are part of the team. So looking at the user interface, this screenshot represents what it used to look like. See, it says conversation highlighted at the top. You can access these in the Teams interface and desktop, web browser, and also on your mobile devices. Now, when you're working with those conversations, this is what you're actually working with, 10,000 foot view. You're inside of a team, and a team is a group of people. It's a membership service powered by Microsoft 365 groups. You're going to have owners, and you're going to have members, and you're going to have guests that are associated with that. If you have access to the team, if you're a member of the team, then you have access to the channels that are associated with the team. You can have up to 200 channels. You can have 30 private channels, and you can have up to 200 channels total inside of a team. So by default, if you're a member of the team, every open channel you have access to, every open conversation or series of posts you have access to. If there are private channels present, if you're a member of the private channel, you can participate in that private conversation. So the thing about this is, if you're a member of a team, any open channel, you are able to access any conversation that's actually happening there. You have persistent searchable history related to that. This is where users get a little bit squeamish. They don't necessarily want to post here because it is open to anybody who's a member of the team. We have the fear of being wrong. We have the fear of being called out if we're not right. We have the fear of just posting in front of a large audience. So here, users are a little bit more reluctant to actually post inside of a channel because it is open for anybody who is currently a member of the team and anybody who might be a member of the team in the future. Now, the other thing to point out around the channel architecture here is that channels are backed up by SharePoint. So every channel that you create is actually going to have a folder in the SharePoint site that backs up the team. That's where your files are going to be stored. So these files are stored in SharePoint, not tied to OneDrive. So if somebody were to leave the organization, these files could live on even after other people have moved on to new roles or even left the company as a whole. Now, we'll come back to channels in just a moment. This just breaks down a little bit around what the navigation looks like. So we've got our Teams icon on the left-hand navigation there. We have Teams, and you can see you can be a member of one or more teams. You can pin channels to the top, just like you can pin your chats to the top. Select a channel and pin it to the top, and the icon that represents the team will show up to the left of the channel name. So you have teams, you have channels, and private channels are going to be identified by a lock icon. You have to be a member of the private channel to participate in the conversation. And if you're not a member of the private channel, you might not even see the channel listed in the user interface. Now, across the top, you're going to have the name of the channel. Then you're going to have post. That's where your conversations happen. And you got the ability to search right from there. You're going to be able to create new conversations in the center. Newest conversations are going to be at the bottom, unlike some of the tools where we scroll up. Teams, you have to scroll down to get to the newest conversation. Now, with that, there are threaded conversations here. We're going to talk about the best practices related to those threaded conversations in just a moment, but you have threaded conversations that happen here. You have replies that you can add to those threaded conversations, and you can start new conversations down at the bottom. You also have indicators off to the right-hand side that are going to say whether it's like an announcement or if you've been mentioned or if the team or the channel's actually been mentioned inside of there. And you have the ability to post news announcements and updates. So the thing about channels and conversations post is that these are one-to-many or many-to-many, but these live on as long as the team lives on. So you don't have to worry about creating a private chat and tying in the right people and removing people when they're no longer necessary. By adding and removing people to the team through that membership service, owners and members and guests, they're going to have access to these conversations. So these conversations live on as long as the team is active and the team lives on. So you can have, in this case, persistent searchable conversations. So there's definitely a little bit of thought that has to go into having a conversation privately in chat versus having a post and allowing that information to live on to benefit the rest of the organization. A lot of times if I'm in a private chat and I think, you know what, the rest of my team might benefit from this, I might go over into Teams and post about the conversation over there and continue the conversation over there rather than maintaining it privately. That way the rest of my team can benefit from it. So you kind of have to think about that as you're moving through. And if you find something important, copy and paste is really helpful here. Now, when you start working, the composure is going to be very similar to what you have with your chat. So you can use the formatter down at the bottom. You can open this up and then you can start drafting your message. Formatting options apply, indents and outdents, emojis, gifs, memes, all of that applies here as well. But post introduced the ability to add subject lines. So there's another best practice for you. Add a subject line. That's a unique identifier for that threaded conversation. And we're going to come back to those in just a moment. But add a subject line so that it's easy to identify a conversation in line with other conversations so that you can quickly see what the subject's about and know whether that's what you're looking for or not. Also, inside of here, you can change your message type. We're going to talk about this in a minute, but there's conversations and there are announcements for news announcements and updates. We can control who can reply here. So if I'm posting something and I don't want responses from my users, I can limit it to just myself or moderators, and I can stop my team from replying to this message. I can also post a message in one or more channels in this team or even other teams that I'm a member of. So this gives me the ability to do messaging across multiple teams and channels very, very quickly. And I can set the importance on a message here, and that's a little bit different than what we can do in chat. Now, when you post here, you're posting to the whole team. Threaded conversations. So conversations sit one on top of another, but they have a reply block actually built into it. Posting here, though, means anybody who is currently a member of the team or will be a member of the team in the future are going to be able to view and respond and react to these conversations. Now, this is best practice, and this is a really big best practice for me. Use that reply button correctly. The message itself will say reply just below the last message. So you'll have an icon that represents the start of the message, who posted it. There'll be a little color block that shows up, kind of scrolls up and down the message, and then there's a reply button. Use the reply button to reply to the message. Don't start a new conversation to reply to a previously existing conversation. That is a floating reply, and it makes it hard to know what you're responding to. So when new users start working here, they ignore the reply button and they go back and they start working with that new conversation button. So I'm going to bounce back to the user interface for a second. So here we have a couple of threaded conversations: how to create an announcement, send an announcement, or send a message to a team. These are two separate conversations. They have a reply button built into them. Start a new conversation at the bottom starts a new threaded message. So the biggest mistake that those users are going to make when they start off is they're going to say, oh, I need to reply to this, and then they're going to go down and they're going to start new conversation. I've been working with teams for over 4 years. This is second nature to me now. I know end users, this is a little bit newer. It's not quite as familiar to them. But this is one of the first things that I show them whenever we go and we do training on this or we start rolling out teams, is the proper way to reply so that we don't have those floating responses and we don't clutter this user interface. So make sure that you're using that reply correctly. And unlike Yammer, we can't move messages around inside of Teams yet. This is something that is on user voice. People have asked for it. The only thing we can do is link to another message. We can't move a message around inside of here yet. So take advantage of those threaded conversations. Reply back to the message. And one last thing, kind of a pro tip. Notice here on the second message toward the bottom, send a message to a channel in Teams. There's no reply block there. It's because it's kind of hidden. You got to scroll down a little bit in order to see it. There's this horizontal rule that shows up on the screen. The reply button is actually hidden back there versus the message up at the top, create an announcement. You can see the reply button from there. So just kind of a pro tip. If you don't see the reply, keep scrolling down until you actually see it. Now, this is something that's exclusive to your channels and posts that's really helpful. Announcements. So when you go to post that message, use the formatter and at the top change the message type to announcement. This gives you a big bold header. You can drop in an image with that, but this says to the user, in addition to the big bold header and image, it gives a red icon off to the side. It says to the user, this is important. Pay attention to it. It gives a visual impact to that interface. We use this for news announcements and updates. So this is a way for me to communicate something important to my users, news announcement or update wise. I can even designate it as important by using the important icon over here if I need, but I'm going to get a red icon that indicates that it's an announcement. And as we just learned a moment ago, you can post an announcement in multiple channels, in multiple teams, all from one stop. So use this for important news announcements and updates. Now I'm going to go back to this architecture slide for just a second here. Every time you create a new team, there's always a general channel created by default. That's one channel that we get right away. You can create additional channels, and those channels are usually created based off business processes, short-term goals, long-term initiatives. Here's the thing though, general is really good for news announcements and updates. General is really good for keeping your team up to date for things like onboarding and for publishing like an About Us. What I strongly recommend as a best practice is do not repurpose the general channel for some specific business initiative, some specific business project or goal that you're actually working on. Use general for news announcements and updates and take advantage of the announcement feature to do that. And you can even minimize the responses there by limiting who can reply back to that message. So you can keep it very much general to the team and what you want to publish to the team, and users can't leave the general channel. They can't hide the general channel. It's locked in. So cross posting, this is an extension of what we were just talking about. When you post in a channel, you can post it in more than one team and more than one channel inside of there. So take advantage of this. Create a news announcement and, or update and post it across multiple teams, all in one go around. When you select this, you choose post in multiple channels, select the channels. It'll show the channels for the current team that you're on, but you can also select and search for additional teams as long as you have permissions to post messaging there. And that's really, really helpful. Saves you a lot of time. Another thing that we can do for communication is you can actually forward emails into your channels. And this is really cool. Every channel has an email address associated with it. If you right click on the channel name, you'll see get email address. And from there, you can use that as a way to forward messages into to the channel. You can even take a message and you can forward it via email to someone so they can see the message and they can respond. But this just gives me a way to take an important communication from Outlook and right inside of Teams very, very quickly. In fact, I can get the channel address. I can go into like my Outlook. I can create a contact, maybe name it the team and the channel name as a contact, and I can use that as a way to forward information into Teams. And this allows me to continue to work with email and Teams side by side with one another. Inside of your channels, it's also going to be really important to react, acknowledge, and save messages as well. So inside of here, you're going to have the same reaction options that you have inside of your private chat. Save important messages for later, because the more teams you work with, the more channels you have, the harder it's going to be for you to find things. So make sure you save those important messages so you can get back to them a little bit later on. Here's also the option where you see the copy link. So this is where you can copy a link to another thread or conversation and reference it very simply. And this is your share to Outlook option where you can actually share a Teams message via Outlook. They can see the message, they can see the things that you responded to, but they won't be able to reply directly back to the message. However, you can forward the message into the channel if you need to. And then the other thing I'll mention about this, from a settings standpoint, there are conversations that I get involved in and I start receiving notifications and I don't really care, or it becomes too much noise. So every individual conversation can be muted. You can turn off individual notifications. You can also mute an entire channel or an entire chat if you need to. Just right click on it and you can mute or you can turn off notifications. But individual messages themselves, you have the ability to turn off those notifications right there. All right, at mentions. When you're in group conversations, at mentions are really important. Type the @ sign, start typing in someone's name, and it'll pull up their name in the user interface, and that's going to send them a notification in the activity feed in the Teams tool. It might also send them a banner notification on their desktop, and it might even send them an email that tells them that they've been mentioned in a conversation. We use this to get a timely response from someone, especially in a group conversation. We want to get a timely response. We want you to know that we mentioned you and to get back to us as quickly as possible. So at mentions are important in group conversations. Use them sparingly, though. And we'll talk about that in the next slide. But at mentions can grab someone's attention. You have the ability to also at mention a channel. That means anybody who's a member of the channel will receive a notification. And you can at mention an entire team. However, that's kind of like a reply all in an email. So that can really drive a lot of users crazy. You might want to avoid that if you can. I'm a member of about 8 different Teams instances, 8 different organizations. I get notifications all the time from somebody at mentioning a team and at mentioning a channel, and they have good intentions whenever they do that. But you're basically shouting to everybody, "Hey, somebody respond to this." Even though you can do it, I would question whether you should, or maybe limit it to certain cases. So protect the value of an at mention. You don't need to at mention everyone. If you're in a private chat, they're going to get an icon that tells them they have a new chat. So you don't need to necessarily at mention inside of a chat. If you're in a team and a channel, that can be really helpful to draw somebody in, especially in those larger group conversations that you have. But remember, Microsoft Teams has a lot of different ways to signal people that there's new content out there, whether it's the red icons in the left-hand navigation, whether channel names and chats have been bolded for new content, whether you see a red icon off to the right-hand side that says that somebody's responded to something that you started, or somebody's at mentioned you directly, or even like an exclamation point to tell you that something important is actually out there. There are a lot of different ways that Teams communicates. There's new content there, so you don't necessarily have to at mention all the time, but for those timely responses, it's really helpful. Use that activity feed to track your conversations as well. So that's going to let you know when you've been at mentioned, when somebody's responded to a conversation that you're a part of, when somebody's reacted to a conversation that you're a part of, or when there's even new content out there that you haven't seen or viewed yet. Now, last couple of things as we get to the home stretch here. Search. Search is built in right to the top, but search is also a command tool. In fact, it's possible just to put your mouse cursor in the search box, at mention somebody, and start sending them a message right away. You can chat right from here without leaving where you are inside of Teams. How cool is that? You can also do a / type in the word chat. It'll ask you who through the person, and then you can type your message. So you can use this to chat and post a message or a communication inside of Teams as well. Super helpful, especially if like I'm looking at something like I've got a document open and I don't want to leave the document, but I need to ask somebody something. I can just go right up to that search box at the top and do that. But it's also going to allow me to actually search. I can search my chats and my channels for content, and search is going to get some big updates coming over the course of the next year. Microsoft made a few announcements at Build recently, and they made a few announcements back in the spring as well. So you're going to see the search experience really start to behave like the rest of the Office 365 search experience here soon. Use the activity feed to track your conversations. That's where I suggest that we start. That's going to help you to get back to some communications, but also don't forget to save messages. That's really helpful. Hide those conversations or those chats that are not as important to you anymore. That's going to cut down on some of the noise. So if you start participating in a whole bunch of conversations, just right click and then you can mute, or you could hide, or you could even leave the conversation if you don't want to receive notifications around it. That's really important for meeting-based communication. So if I'm in a meeting and I leave the meeting and people are saying, "Thanks, great presentation," and they want to stick around and ask additional questions, I'm going to receive notifications because I was part of that meeting. Go to the chat nav area, find the meeting, right click on it, and either mute or hide, and that'll minimize the notifications so you don't have to worry about that anymore. Mute an entire chat, it's really easy, same process. So you can mute a group chat that's not as active or it doesn't apply to you as much anymore. It will still bold the name to tell you that there's new activity there. Turn off notifications for specific conversation. I've already talked about this, that one's pretty straightforward. And then choose your notifications for channels. Go to your channels, right click or select the ellipsis, and then turn on your channel notifications and go channel by channel and determine how much information you want. You can even hide a channel and minimize all the notifications unless you browse to it manually, but you can choose whether you receive the desktop banners or whether you receive activity feeds or even email related to that. So take some time to do that, and it'll really cut down on the amount of noise and activity and notifications coming at you so you can concentrate and get some work done. And then go to your profile in the top right-hand corner, select the settings, and then you can turn on and off notifications for things like mentions, messages, and meetings and so forth. I usually turn off all the email. I'm in Teams all the time anyways. I don't need it in email, so I turn off most of the email. Maybe just do banners. And in a lot of cases, I don't even do the desktop notifications because I have the Teams client usually running. I just use the activity feed. So I push a lot of my content to only show in feed. That's my personal preference, but work with your end users on that so that they have some knowledge about that. All right, so we've got a few minutes left. I think we're going to open things up for some Q&A. Once again, I want to thank all of the amazing sponsors for helping us to put on this event. I want to thank the organizers at Commsverse for giving me the opportunity to speak on communicating inside of Microsoft Teams. I thank you for your time here today. I'm going to switch things over to Q&A, and we'll spend some time here, and then I'm going to head over to the breakout room if anybody has any follow-up questions from there. So I know there are a couple of questions in the chat window. I'm going to go ahead and start answering those, but if you have any more, send them into the Q&A, and we'll take those as we go through. So one question that I see right away, can you remove chat via retention policies? That is correct. I did address that a little bit earlier. You can put retention policies in place, and you can remove individual messages inside of Microsoft Teams. In fact, one of the companies that I work with, we do that. 30 days, individual messages are deleted, but anything within that 30-day window is still searchable and persistent. The comment is many of these tips on how to use Teams equate to usage etiquette. What's your advice for teaching etiquette to the organization? I mentioned Jump to 365 a little while ago. My buddy Matt Wade, who's actually a speaker here at Commsverse, that's his site. He put that together. I'm a guest blogger over there, and Matt actually put together an everyday guide to Microsoft Teams etiquette. I highly recommend you check that out. Again, Matt Wade, Etiquette Microsoft Teams, he put together a guide on this. That's kind of the go-to for that. He's got a lot of great content on that, but definitely check that out. As far as etiquette, when this session gets published, go back and show it to your users. Shameless plug there, but go back and show that to your users. I tried to drop in a ton of best practices that I've learned all along the way around, like, the real world experience that I've had with this. So that's another thing to definitely check out. And even on Microsoft's website, I believe support.office.com and docs.microsoft.com, they have Microsoft Teams best practices. They're taking a lot of information from the community. They're posting it on their sites. So you'll find a lot of that there. That's another place where you can find some of those best practices. All right, any other questions coming through?
At this time, I don't see any, Andy, just on my end. Let's see. And I think that's about, well, I guess we have a few more minutes, but without any more questions, that's all we have time for the session. If you want to talk with Andy following the session, you can find him in the breakout area, and I'll post that link now. Let's see, I guess that's it. And thank you everyone for watching. Appreciate you, Andy Honeycutt, for being here today and speaking to us on your guide to better communication in Teams.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah.